Welcome, everyone. I believe that we are probably on our fifth class at this point. It's October the 13th, 2024, and everybody has got, is that not right? Excuse me, the 20th, that's right. I've been a little disoriented since I've come out of the volcanoes of Iceland. And everybody's got a list at this point, whether you're listening on audio or getting the emails or have received a handout here in our classroom at Woodmont Christian School on the 60 characteristics that can come out of what we call complex post-traumatic trauma. And another way I've been thinking about that, because a lot of people have said to me in response that they just do not see themselves having had trauma. They just can't relate to that. I want to pose it to you a different way. There are things that get us off track in life. Like, think about it this way. All of us would like to try to take a path through life that leads us through health, through joy, through staying out of awful trouble, to not get our foot in a rusty trap that's going to lead us to have to go to the hospital and get tetanus shots and waste time, et cetera, okay? You kind of get the metaphor. So think about these 60 things as being the traps of life. They could be mental, physical, emotional, spiritual. So I think we ought to reframe it that way. These things are the 60 traps, the things that can get us hung up either for a while in life or all through our lives. And every single one of us are born into households that are imperfect. And the way that we try to survive the fact that none of our 12 needs can all be met, no one is perfect, and many of us were born into households that where our parents just did not know how to meet our needs, or perhaps theirs were not met, set us up for conditions to where we have had to pull out survival skills. And we've all reached a point to where a lot of those no longer work. So it's time to talk about those and discard the ones that are causing us problems now. Now, I promised you all that we would go back to the beginning of the first of those 60 characteristics. And many of you are here this morning and started listening in from all your fall break locations, because the number one is perfectionism. Okay? This, you may say, I don't have this, I stumble over my own shoes, my closet's a mess, and all these other things. However, there may be an area or domain, as we'll call this, of your life that has to be in perfect order. Okay, it's kind of a misnomer that perfectionism covers all areas of your life. I know a person who, from all other accounts, would consider himself to be a complete slob, but don't you leave anything in his car. It is pristine. Saturday morning, he gets out all of his gizmos and his wax and his detailing brush, and he is so proud of that baby. And you do not take trash in his car. You do not, you don't touch that. So there's a domain or an area of life that he is absolutely keeps in pristine condition. So just an example. This is well known in the field of behavioral science as having a root in complex trauma, also in our biology or in our DNA, also in modeling by our caregivers. Tim Fletcher, who is the founder of our life program and all of this wonderful research, he was telling me he remembered a client about 17 years ago where he was asked to draw a picture, and he would go around in the group and he would check out, this was in adulthood, everybody else's picture. And if his was not the best or up to standard, he would rip up his picture, throw it away in the wastebasket in front of everybody, and start again. So to reach this point in one's 50s in life was really something. Now, when I heard this from Tim, I had a real flashback, and I was really surprised. This was not my first rodeo, at having a tutorial with somebody. All of a sudden, I was at my table in first grade. I mean, like just back there, and maybe it was the power of Tim's presence that had this effect on me. I don't know what, but I was just so all in for additional healing and training for this program. And I could remember at my little table exactly who was there, and I could remember what everybody's pictures looked like, and the girl at the left looking at hers and exactly what it looked like, and the fact that she had used all different colors and the lines were perfectly straight. And over here to her left, what that little girl had drawn, and that she had totally stayed within the lines in precise little sections. And my heart just dropping down into my toes and thinking, oh my goodness, how can I slide mine onto my lap and hide it under the table? I was so ashamed. I can tell you their names, I can tell you what their pictures look like. And it was amazing. I'd often longed to have that kind of recall in therapy, like so many of my counselees do, to have a flashback that easily. And here I was actually having that. And I was like, okay, hooked, perfectionism, I think I need to do this a little bit more. So I don't know if you've had something like that, but think back through childhood or growing up in which you sort of got outside yourself and compared yourself to someone else's work or athletic ability or really anything in school or in sports where you compared. You can also see in mothers and fathers who are just sort of determined to have the best kid in sports or in some kind of an activity, extracurricular activity. They may be more involved than anybody else or be over involved. I recall someone that I worked with years ago, and I asked the student, what they wanted, where could they visualize they would feel the most free, because they were struggling with OCD and perfectionism. And he said, I want to go to practice and know that my dad's not going to be there. And how different that was from another kid I was working with who would love for his parent to be there. He just wanted to be out there and relax and do his thing because he just felt like he was being eyeballed, with a standard of perfectionism all the time. Report cards. Another flashback that I had was that my parents had been to a seminar on parenting. This was in the 1960s, and they came home all of a sudden and said, we're going to have a family conference. And we didn't know what that meant, but we knew that the family needed to be there. And my dad lit a fire to create an atmosphere of warmth, and we were down there. We thought we might all be in trouble. We weren't real sure. And I think I might have been 12 or something, so my sisters would have been like 6 and 8. And they brought my report card out, and I thought, oh no, I'm going to get it now. And they said, and we've decided that we're going to pay you to get B's. And I went, what? I brought these A's home, isn't that enough? No, we've set it this thing that, you know, if you have perfectionism, that you should offer a reward so that your child won't have perfectionism. Well, that made absolutely no sense to me at all. It just never, ever registered. But what they were trying to do in the psychology of the 1960s was to offer a reward so that your kid wouldn't be so stressed out. It didn't work with me at all, but I can see back then that, you know, they were trying to work with perfectionism in children and to try to get parents to notice those early signs and to try to perform that. But I've never been motivated by paying less money. That just never worked with me. So, but I can certainly give my parents credit for that. Another thing that we see a lot in experiments is that you will have stories about a child that will fill a glass of juice, and then you lay out, you know, 5 more glasses, and they will absolutely have to make sure that all 6 glasses are exactly the same from the top. And you know, it's not unusual to see them pour them all out and refill until they're exactly the same from the top. Or I recall one child who would just get irate at the mother because anytime there was the birthday party would be ruined because each slice of cake was not exactly the same. Now, these are very extreme cases, so I'm trying to lay out very, very extreme cases, but you can see that if there was chaos in the home, this would have been an attempt at control. This would have been that I know what to expect, everything is going to be the same, and if there's a deviation from that, you know, I just go crazy inside. But it's a way for a child to feel secure. And again, I'm laying out something that's rather extreme, because if I can feel that things are perfect or reliable, I will not feel shame. You know, home life can be all over the place, or I could feel shame about something, but if I can just in the little things micromanage, just in the little things. Perfectionism around the house. You know, often I'll hear stories about how if any time someone was going to come over, in the South we call it having company, at least we used to several years ago. The house has got to be just so. I recall one instance in which the mother would, you know, always say, no, we have to wait until the house is cleaned. The kids have their friends over. And so it would finally be that day when the house was all clean and ready, and another mom would bring the kids over. And so the other mom, the visiting mom, looked around and said, a little louder than she should have, "This doesn't look like a home, this looks like a museum." And of course the kids that lived there were so ashamed. Mom didn't mean anything about it. It was just a very spontaneous observation. But it was so true. Everything was put up and placed, perfectly curated, just like a museum. And of course the kids loved to go to the other house because it didn't matter. It was for fun. It was for play. It was for flexibility. So the mom, no doubt, was a perfectionist, and she'd been taught by her mother, who'd been taught by her grandmother, that the rule was if anybody comes over, everything has got to be perfect. I think I said a few minutes ago that perfectionism comes in different domains. You know, I told you the story about the guy that had the pristine car, but it kind of gave the impression of being a slob and all of these other ways. they've actually isolated 7 domains of perfectionism, and I think within this next description you can count up 7. But it's most clearly seen in the workplace or at school, having to be the best student, the best employee. Sometimes we can see it in intimate relationships, love or marital relationships, having to be that I'm the best husband, I'm the best little wifey. Friendships, where they may place these unrealistic standards on themselves about how to be a good friend, or they may place standards on others of what they expect others to do for them, and it's a very unrealistic standard. Sometimes it's in the area of physical activity, and so they are the best in the gym. They work out harder, longer, stronger, more consistency. Come rain or shine, it's kind of like the post office, sleet or snow, they're there working out. And even if they've got an injury, they will work through it. And of course, you will see that'll set them back maybe 6 months. And, they just do not listen to their body. They're just driven by that voice in their head. And it may be that it's their environment. Their home has got to be immaculate. Their backyard, their front yard, there can't be a weed. That grass has got to be cut religiously. And it may be that the domain is their hygiene. It could be their health. It could be such a strict diet. It could be such a strict cleanliness. It could be that they can't go out in public unless their face is on perfectly, unless their clothes are just absolutely excellent. I knew of a person that had one of the first of those little portable steamers in a rack, and it was by her door, and she would steam everything, before she would go literally out the door. I hadn't encountered that before, but there are those steamers before they go out the door. And it may also be in the area of how they speak or grammar. The right use of words becomes so important. My dad was a professional editor for many years, and so all of my work was edited, and I learned how to be an editor. So one of the first things that I did in my anti-perfectionism self-help was that when we started texting, I would rarely use punctuation, and it was kind of like my little joke with myself, like, haha, I don't have to do it. See if you use punctuation. I'm not going to worry about punctuation. The other thing that I did with myself was to pick like 2 nights a week where I would rinse the dishes, but I was not going to put them in the dishwasher. And I suggested this to my clients. I said, okay, who were suffering also with perfectionism. I said, take a white towel, rinse the stuff off, but just put it over the sink. You're not going to be able to see it, and then go do something fun. Oh, I couldn't do that. I said, well, try it. You might like it. It's going to buy you 30 minutes a night. You can go watch a show. You can go to bed well. You can go take a hot bath. You can, go do this. Sure enough, it was magic. Pick one thing you can play with. Well, it's really funny because there was an article in the Wall Street Journal about just that technique, and they're calling it something really cute now. But, it's how to buy self-care time. And so you try to break that old mold that doesn't hurt anything or anybody and make it a game. Make it a silly little game. I have lots more, by the way, if you want to know, but I won't crowd you all with it. Perfectionism in teens. Now, at the very beginning of teen adult life, where it isn't a real big problem yet, most teens won't describe their perfectionism in a very negative way. They usually put it out there in very positive terms. they will say they're just committed to pursuing excellence, and they feel really good about that. I'm just pursuing excellence, Mom or Dad, or I'm just a high achiever, or I'm just a type A personality, I'm just a little driven, or I'm really self-motivated, I'm detail-oriented, I'm very disciplined. And so it's all presented as a very positive trait. And that's what I said when I was in junior high school to my parents, paid to get lower grades. So, don't do that stuff with me. I'm just pursuing excellence. But what can start off as looking like a very positive thing can turn into a negative. So we have to be careful in looking at our teenagers sometimes, because if they're pursuing validation, they're longing for acceptance. Some of them are trying to be perfect. And so sometimes they're kind of paralyzed by fear, and they're very hard on themselves. So it can be something that turns from looking very good into something that can be destructive if it turns into perfectionism, and getting into some of these other characteristics. So that's a piece that is so important if we want to help people properly in dealing with perfectionism. This took me back to in my own perfectionism. In my mid-20s, I had been working already for so many years that I was managing 3 offices in the recruiting industry, the headhunting industry, and it was Nashville, Atlanta, and Knoxville. And there was a person that, he needed to be productive. He had 3 children and a wife, and very qualified, but he just couldn't meet his numbers. He just could not produce. And I had 2 levels of bosses above me that would call me in and go, can't you get him motivated? Why is this happening? Why does he just sit at his desk? And I just gave it all I had. I wanted so much more for him, and I knew he had bills to pay, and I tried everything I could. And one day I went in and we had a meeting, and he wasn't there, but he left an article on his desk, obviously for me, and it said, "The fruits of perfectionism are wrought with self-destruction." I remember reading that, and I thought, this is the weirdest thing I have ever read. And I don't understand how it applies to him. I don't understand how it applies to me. And I think I totally forgot about that until I took this training to come share this with you all. What he was trying to say to me was that he was so afraid that he couldn't do that job perfectly and do everything perfectly that he was paralyzed, and he didn't know how to explain it. And so that article by Watchman Nee, was a very classic Christian piece, because I was a Christian, he thought that would communicate with me and that I would understand it. Now, probably he recognized the same thing in me, it was just in a different domain, that I was a perfectionist. I just didn't get paralyzed the same way he did. So again, just sharing with you personally how one can see another one, but in a different domain. When I realized that, and I thought about how much pressure that I put on that guy and what he was trying to tell me, this was just in putting this together. I was just like, oh my goodness. Oh my goodness, he was trying to tell me that he couldn't do what we were asking him to do, but he was too ashamed to tell me in the only way that he could. And if I had not the presence, I had not the consciousness, I had not the awareness, 42 years ago, to even begin to understand this stuff. So, the word shame. The greatest negative result that comes out of these life traps or complex trauma can be that a child may not feel safe at times in life. This can be through abuse, this can be through feeling neglected, feeling abandoned. And I don't mean actually abandoned, like orphanage or, left in a basket. I just mean not feeling fully seen or understood. Then we can feel like every person who really gets to know the real me could treat me the same, where I might feel abused, I might feel neglected, I might feel abandoned. So my self-identity may include shame. So that first fear of abandonment and rejection is that if people really get to know me, they might respond like my mom or my dad did. So now I'm afraid to let people get to know me, and if people get to know me, they're going to hurt me, and then if I ever fail, I'll be laughed at, I could be put down, I would be hurt even more. So here's a person that's hiding who they are, and they're not really wanting anybody to get to know them. And they're really convinced on a deep level that being authentic is not a good thing. It gets you hurt. But they still have needs that need to be met. They still long to be loved. They still long to be respected and accepted and being part of. So then on top of that, shame produces all these negative emotions of pain, fear, anger, and guilt. And the person can't resolve them. Do you see the trap, the big trap they're falling in? Right there, that squeezed position. So they just stay there and grow and live with that. Now, we're not meant to be validators of ourselves. We need other people. We're hungry for that. That's not how we're created to be by God. If you've ever had the thought in childhood or sometime during your life, I wish I weren't me, how'd I end up in this family? Where's my real family? I know I was adopted, but they've never told me. Maybe this sounds foreign to some of you, but I don't know. It's just a second nature to me and many people I know. But it all comes out of shame. So if the shame gets too much, the brain is so creative, and it begins to explore this. The brain says, what are my options to solve the shame? Like, in other words, this hurts too much, this is too heavy. What can I do? What can the brain do to solve this? So the brain can't relax until it finds what it feels is a solution for a painful thing, and shame is the most painful thing. Okay, here's the first option. I'm gonna try wearing mask. I won't be authentic. I'll wear a mask, and then people will love me and they'll like me. Or I'll become a people pleaser, and that way they'll love me and respect me. Okay? So we'll have mask, we'll have people pleaser, Or here's the next one. I'm going to learn to manipulate people and not tell them what I really want, but I'll still get my needs met. Here's another one. I'll become a control freak. I'll get a place of power and then I'll control others so they'll respect me and meet my needs. Or here's another one. I'll develop codependent relationships where I will rescue people and then they will adore me. Or here's another one. I'll just not set any boundaries with people because when I do, boundaries just upset people all the time and then they don't like me. They don't like me when I put up boundaries. So all those things I just mentioned, that little handful, are possible solutions to shame that the brain comes up with. And we can have a mixture of all those, or all those at the same time. So for some people, out of those handful of things, the brain lands on perfectionism. And it did with me. I'm just talking about myself so that you can see yourselves more clearly. It's so much easier when somebody gives a personal example and you know that person. I have always had this crystal clear in my mind of being about maybe two or three, and sitting by that same fireplace in our living room with a naked Barbie doll and a box of Kleenex, and this voice behind me that I couldn't see, but it was my mother's voice. And I was wrapping Kleenexes around my Barbie doll's body, and the idea was to create fashions or dresses out of the Kleenex for the doll. And the voice kept saying, now can you make a better one? Now can you make a more perfect one? Now can you make a more perfect one? And the wads were the discarded ones that were bad. Over and over and over and over and over. And so that was the kind of stuff that I did. There weren't any in the good pile. They were all in the bad pile. So that is a very clear memory that I can share with you that you can use to say, okay, are my discards or are my thoughts all in the negative pile? You know, am I acting like that little child, just my little Annie, you know, going, when they were probably all perfectly good Kleenex outfits, but it was that voice, see, that internalized voice that I carried with me all my life. That's a pretty good picture of what we do to ourselves. And now that we're the adult, we can really take control and say, hey, perfectionism, you're just one of these many traps that I was lured into at a very young age, and it mistrained my brain. I need to get up, sit in the chair in front of the fireplace, take all those outfits out and go, you are perfectly okay. And we're going to recycle all this into some things of goodness. We're not going to accept that anymore. So that's really what healing is all about. Wind that tape backwards on all this stuff. So perfectionism is really sort of an antidote for feeling shame. We think we found the solution to shame if we're perfect, because then we can respect ourselves and like ourselves if we're perfect. We think others will like us and respect us. We think others will validate us. So here's the thing. We're convinced that we have to earn their love. See, there's no place for unconditional. It's like earn, reward, sort of like the report card. sort of like points or money or whatever currency is in there. There's nothing in here, if you'll notice, about inherent worth. Just because you are. Most of the time, it's based on, if I do this, I can help out in the family and I can make things run smoother. And I'll never be a burden to others. There's some impetus or some motivation due to a situation to make perfectionism look like the solution to my biggest problems, my greatest longings, how to get my needs met. So, how to tell if you might be a perfectionist? There in research, they've really gone into this and come up with 31 characteristics of perfectionism. And I'll have a handout for you all later on this. There's slides that are coming that are going to make this a lot easier that should be here. But we'll just kind of do this together, and I'll mention some of these. So don't feel like you need to take notes because the slides are coming. But number one is you feel like you're going to fail at everything. So fail at everything you try. So you're just not going to be able to do it perfectly, which was the example of the guy who couldn't get up from his desk to go out and do his job. And you struggle to be honest and authentic and share your thoughts and feelings with others for fear they won't see you in the same way. They'll see you as weak, controlling, needing to have everything just so, needing to have everybody do what you want so you don't get hurt, so your image is maintained. Obsessed with rules, lists, and works, so you're always focused on you've got to do it this way, you've got to do it right, on your to-do list, making sure you get everything done. Or you could go the other way and flip it, and you may be extremely apathetic, and you just can't get around to doing what you need to do. You may view the end product as the most important part of an undertaking. So people who view the goal or that end point, that's all they can see, and are totally unable to view the process as having any value, are usually pretty miserable and also perfectionist. Not being able to see a task is finished unless the result is perfect. So they may take an excessive amount of time to complete a lot of tasks because they have got to be perfect. And then there's obsessive thinking, planning over and over and over and thinking of every possible detail that you need to cover. Not being able to turn your brain off as you worry about whether you'll be able to do it well enough. Even after you do something, you're never totally satisfied with what you've done or with yourself. You set unrealistic standards for yourself. You live your life by shoulds. I should have done this. I should have thought of that. And those are unrealistic. When you fail, you're very hard on yourself. And then if you're pretty good at kind of being in this perfect place, you look down on others who aren't as good as you, and that just makes you feel better about yourself. You feel guilty if you relax, because you always need to be doing something. But you relax, it just looks like you're lazy. You feel guilty if you say no to somebody, because you think, I should have been there for them. I should have helped them. You reject the weak part of yourselves, which aren't really weak, but you deem them as weak, and you try to keep them hidden. You don't want anybody else to see them. You have difficulty accepting your limitations. You don't want to think that you even need a certain amount of sleep. To think that you can't work 20 hours a day. You think that you should be able to. You may have difficulty being vulnerable. You may have difficulty with emotions. You may try to just live out of your brain instead, because then it could just be very neat, very tidy. Emotions really make life messy, unpredictable. You have difficulty with intimacy and intimate relationships because intimacy calls for sharing, for vulnerability, for authenticity, and then your weakness might come out. You have difficulty with change, with the unknown, because there might be something that happens that you weren't prepared for, and then you might fail. So if you go to a job where the learning curve is quite long, because it might be an involved process, what if you don't like those kind of jobs? You want a job where you can become perfect at it the first day. You may get depressed by unmet goals. You fear failure, rejection, abandonment. So people start to get to know you, the fear starts to increase inside of you that people may abandon you. So perfectionists are actually controlled by fear. Perfectionists do not understand unconditional love. They see love as something they have to earn, and they can only earn it if they're perfect. Perfectionists are characterized by all or nothing thinking. I have to be perfect, and if I have one mistake, I'm a total failure. That's the all or nothing thinking. Perfectionists are characterized at times by procrastination. So they resist sometimes starting a task for fear they're not going to be able to do it perfectly. And so they can't start it until they're sure they can do it perfectly. So we may procrastinate or start a task and spend so much time doing it to make it perfect that we avoid or don't get to other important tasks. And then they all get pushed back, procrastinated, because of how long it's taking to do an existing task. So I have many people will tell me this about how everything will get like all backed up, and why do they get all backed up with things? And then I may say to them, do you think you might be a perfectionist? And they just can't see it because the kitchen table is overloaded with everything. And I give them some of this information, and it really begins to make sense about, where the roadblock is. So they tend to focus on their failures more than their successes. Validation just about always comes from their externals, their accomplishments, instead of back to who they really are, a given. Their gifts, their inner worth. Because they've been trained to have value come from their accomplishments, not from who they are. Comparing ourselves with others, constantly needing always to be a little bit better than everybody else. Fear of asking for help or to admit that we're struggling would be failure or be a weakness. So all within that verbiage were about 31 different characteristics, which you'll see on a slide. So, if you're kind of keeping track or have a percentage in your mind, you can kind of figure out sort of how you did there, whether you were at low, middle, or upper range. And I want to read you a writing before we wind up today that is an incredible writing entitled "The Problem with Perfectionism" that was submitted anonymously by a real person, a real perfectionist, and see how much you might relate to this. And she entitled it "The Problem with Perfectionism." Quote, "I'm a perfectionist. I get it, but is it a big deal? Well, what I want you to understand was the brain developed perfectionism to solve the shame problem. But I hope that you see that it backfires. So instead of solving shame, it actually ends up creating more shame because nobody can be perfect. And so you will fail. You won't be good enough. You won't meet the standards you set for yourself. So you're always feeding, I'm not good enough, I'm a failure. So then that creates even greater fear, even greater anxiety, even greater relationship problems, because you're trying to hide more and more and more. And that's the problem with perfectionism. Now, let me put it this way. I think for many people, what they begin to realize is that perfectionism has become a prison for them. Perfectionism is a taskmaster that is very cruel, that is never satisfied, that is always pointing out what we have done wrong. And then we're locked in this prison that feels like failure. And it's a prison of shame. It mistrains our conscience. And what it says is that unless you're perfect, you failed. So every time you're not perfect, your conscience bothers you. But that is false guilt. So now you have this conscience that's always going off constantly because you're never perfect. So now you live in constant guilt that's really false guilt. But to you it feels like true guilt. Perfectionism is only a shield that we have used to protect against the pain of blame, judgment, or shame. Unquote. Wow. That writer's had a lot of enlightenment. Come a long way. Spotting things with an internal flashlight that used to be absolute darkness. Kind of like my flashlight went off when I recall that scenario about my employee and why he'd given me the answer there and I was too blind to see it. I don't know how many of you are familiar with Julia Cameron, who has written The Artist's Way, Walking in the World, a whole series of books in which she has worked with people all over the world to really bring up their creativity, their lost creativity, up out of the darkness and healing. And I've worked with her stuff for probably 30 years just to try to get people to heal from perfectionism that's blocking their light, their inner light, their self-acceptance, who they really are, and bring out their authentic selves. And a quote from her Artist's Way, she says, "Perfectionism is not a quest for the best. It's actually the pursuit of the worst in ourselves, the part that tells us that nothing we do will ever be good enough, that we should try harder." And I will give you one more quote on another writing that was sent in, another anonymous sharing. "I tried so hard to be who you want me to be, and the more I tried, the more I failed. So why bother trying at all? Or it just means I have to try harder. There must be something wrong with me if I can't be perfect. It must mean that what I've been told is true. I'm not good enough. I try to quiet the inside storm by perfecting the outside mess, but it never goes away. Perfectionism trained me to live in instant gratification, to stay in the easy, simple things, because I can perfect those. I don't ever try anything new or things I know I will fail at. I don't know how to work hard for anything or overcome challenges or apply myself. It's so hard to be patient with a slow process. It's easy for me to remove chaos. It's easy for me to stop behaviors because failing is not an option for me. It's tied in with my worth. Fear motivates me more than anything else. Fear of failure, fear of the unknown, fear of not being accepted or loved, fear of getting hurt. My expectations of myself also affect my expectations of others. So I'm angry all the time, and I'm always pointing out other people's flaws. I think everything should come easily, and I shouldn't have to work hard for anything. I'm trying to be perfect to make others happy. I'm trying to make their lives easier by not being a burden. I'm trying to fix the family's problems by being perfect and problemless so that I can guarantee they will love me. Signed, Anonymous. We just want to be loved. We just want to belong. But what we really want, underneath all that, is to be free. And it's my hope, and it's my prayer as we've looked at this first life trap, which is perfectionism, that we can begin the process of freeing ourselves. Knowledge is power. Practice gets you on the way. So I hope you've heard something today that you've clicked with. Maybe you're going to put that kitchen towel over the dishes tonight. Maybe you'll not worry so much about your punctuation or whatever it is. We look forward to having you back next week as we look at the second characteristic. God bless.